Climate talks in the Brazilian Amazon, the fight against fast fashion, and EU plans to forfeit privacy rules for the sake of AI. Some of the stories shaping Brussels this week. Welcome to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon. For our third episode, I'm thrilled to be joined here in our Euronews studio by Chloe Michalak, the Belgian climate activist and influencer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tommy Houtanen, the director of the Wilfred Martin Centre for European Studies.
Thank you.
That's, of course, the official think tank affiliated with the European People's Party. Tommy, welcome.
Indeed.
And joining us from the Brazilian city of Belém at the mouth of the Amazon River is Brigitte van den Berg, a Dutch MEP from D66 with Renew Europe here in the Parliament. Great to have you with us as well, Brigitte.
Yeah, so happy to be here live from Brazil.
Live from Brazil. Well, let's start there, of course, because the COP is finishing this Friday. So we're all curious to see what the outcome will be. It's your first time at COP. Has it been worth the trip, Brigitte?
Yes. So I've been here now for a little less than a week. And it's just so impressive to be at a COP for the first time. Like you see all the people coming together from all sorts, all cultures, all colors, all ages to work together on stopping climate change. And yeah, that's truly inspiring. So yeah, it's been worth the trip for sure.
Because it's not really a conference. It's more like a climate festival. I remember I was covering the COP26 in Scotland a few years ago, and it was exhausting. We were there for almost 2 weeks. And of course, as you say, the scale of people, you've got the lobbyists, the activists, indigenous groups, the scientists, the negotiators. And of course, you're in a UN zone, so you can spot famous politicians. But Chloe, as somebody who's been trying to shout from the sidelines here about what's going on and what's at stake for the climate, what is your take on COP? Is it a good format?
In general or this one? In
general.
I think there's this saying, I think it was Einstein who said it. Sorry if it wasn't. But you really have to be fools to go through the same process all the time and expect a different result. And I think that's what we're seeing with COPs. It's this started 33 years ago. I wasn't born. And we are in the situation that we're in, which is, yes, sure, it would have been worse without COPs. I agree. I acknowledge that. But we're still on a trajectory that puts millions of lives at risk. That's what's at stake. And we know near where we need to be. So I think, it's great if we have another roadmap. It's great if we have another statement. I'm all for it. Yes. But if at the same time there's this massive incoherence at home in wealthy countries where we're basically weakening and destroying every regulation that could actually get us where we need to be in terms of climate, then I think it's difficult to really have hope on the outcome of this COP.
The science is clear that the world is not on track. And Tommy, this COP is taking place without the American administration even getting really involved.
Exactly. And that is the challenge for Europe. So you have all the big players. You have, as you mentioned, the United States, who is not practically there and doesn't show so much interest. Then you have China, who is very much pushing the ball to the West, to Europe. And, they are following the double strategy. On the other hand, they are pushing the climate industries and all of that, but the CO2 emissions are going to continue. And India has also the economic focus. And now, 10 years after Paris, the pressure is, huge. Because, as Chloe said, the objectives have been stated, but they are not reached. So that's the basic setting. And as Brigitte mentioned, they will have a lot of struggle to get the basic resolution. It's very interesting to see what comes up.
So Brigitte, you've been there already for 1 week. Who have you met? Yeah. What have you got done? What have you achieved?
Yeah, so we've been meeting with a lot of delegations from different countries. And I agree with all the skeptics that I heard here in your studio, because, of course, we are doing too little too late. That's so clear when we look, for example, at the global stocktake that we took 2 years ago. It's very clear that we do that every 5 years. We check, okay, what are the things we are doing and is it enough? And every time we have to conclude we're not doing enough. And that is why, for example, the EU is pushing to have a more frequent global stocktake. Because, if we don't do that, then by only in 2030, we find out that we didn't do enough to reach the 2030 goals. So let's make sure that we have that stocktake every year so we can be more confrontational and have more intense conversations with all the different countries that their national plans have to be more ambitious. Because that was what the preparations of this COP was all about. Everybody had to hand in their national plans. We, of course, as the EU, did that just before we went to the COP, which was way too late to be.
Way too late. It was like an 11th
to take a leading role and show that we are ambitious. Okay, we came now with a range to the COP, and internationally we are still seen as one of the most ambitious, and we are, but it's harder to be super strict For example, yesterday we talked with China, and we as the parliament very much expressed our sadness about their national plans because they only agreed to only reduce 10%. Well, that's really not enough for the largest polluter of the world. They also say, well, you were also very late with your plans, and you also have a range that differs a lot. So let's.
I saw that. Yeah, the Chinese had some harsh comments for Brussels, didn't they, Tommy?
You spoke about China. One, fact is that China is already the biggest contributor to climate change than Europe historically, because that's always the argument they make. But the question to Brigitte and Chloe, if you look the domestic debate in the European Union, also global, isn't the case that the condition seems to be that the decarbonization needs to be economically feasible? It needs to make economically sense. If you look the debate in Europe, as Euronews published the polling, it clearly shows that the citizens are extremely worried about climate change, and they want to take, that action is taken. But they're more concerned about their own livelihood. And that has a political implications, like we did see in last European elections.
Well, this is it. They don't want to feel like they have to pay, especially when the Europeans were not the biggest polluters when you look at the Americans and the Chinese, Chloe.
Yeah, so on the cost of living versus environment versus economy, a quick comment, and then maybe I can follow up on Brigitte's comment about other countries and their vision of the EU at these events. So, of course, it has to make economic sense. And I think there's just so many ways that it can. And we see that actually the cost of inaction will be way, way, way bigger than the cost of action. The problem is that we have politicians currently in Europe at the EU level and at the national level that are doing everything they can to slow down this transition, to slow down the investments that are needed in our industry, in our economy, that are basically just making chaos and unpredictability for businesses. And we've seen it with the vote last week, where basically climate transition plans were scrapped from one of the most important regulations to achieve our climate ambition, which was the due diligence. So I always find it funny when Europe goes to these events and they're like, we have a 2040 target, we now have a 2030, but then at home, we're basically destroying everything that would allow us to get to these targets. And then I went actually to the plastic treaty negotiations in Korea last year, which is way smaller than COP, but it's basically the same vibe. And I found it so interesting how most countries around the world, in their relationship to what Europe was saying, they would be like, yeah, we know that you guys are going to say all the right things, but we don't really trust you in the implementation anymore. So the countries that they were looking up to for comments, for statements, for ambition, for commitments were China, India, Brazil, South Africa. The EU, it was like, we know you like to play the good guys, but then when it comes to implementation, you're not there.
That's very true. And I mean, these plans as well to be climate neutral by 2050 and transform all our sectors, doesn't look really possible.
Yeah, but of course, it's the fact is, if you look at China and India, how they're playing the game is that they play it in economy first. They are very much on the debate, but that's the defining factor. And that's the game where we are losing.
I guess this is all direct consequences of the elections, that the Greens did very badly in the European Parliament elections, and the consequences are, the EPP won, and now the EPP is working a lot with the far right as well, scaling back perhaps on a lot of this legislation. Brigitte, your thoughts?
Well, the thing is that I think we have to be realistic that, the world is now, that real progress is made when the pragmatists meet the idealists. And what I do see is that if we set straight goals for the future, for 2035, 2040, our businesses in Europe, they are ready to make the transition to electrification. They just need some de-risking from the EU. They need some funds from the EU. But a lot of companies are ready to make the jump. We just need to give them the policy security. And that's why, I'm also very disappointed that we back down on some of our rulings. But it is now up to us, up to the politicians, to create a future again where the industries and the companies can actually trust us, and also combine it with our geopolitical position, or combine it with our targets on defense. And if we can really make that pragmatic and idealistic goals meet, then I am optimistic that Europe can make the big steps, because our industry, they are investing in clean tech, and they are willing to invest in clean tech even more if they can have the trust that we keep our goals on the horizon.
And just like looking at the big headlines coming out of this COP30, there was the signature deal on the roadmap to phase out fossil fuels with 82 countries, but the EU, of course, wasn't there because the EU is still divided, Chloe.
I think
25 of the 27 countries of the EU signed it.
Yeah.
But we really hope that the EU can. We are pushing as Parliament that the EU as a whole is going to support this. But of course, working with 27 countries together, it always takes a while.
Yeah, and Poland and Italy, I think, were the ones that weren't necessarily the most convinced. So there's this roadmap. Yes, that's one of the big things. Hopefully we see some strong language on the phasing out of fossil fuels in there. And there are two other things that people are really expecting from this COP, right? There's the financing aspect, and we are nowhere where we need to be. We would require 12 to 14 times the amount of financing for adaptation that we have now. So let's see what comes out on that front. And then there was a very strong emphasis on deforestation, this COP being held in Belém. Yeah. And right in the middle of COP, yet another terrible signal from the EU as we postpone again by 1 year the EU anti-deforestation law. So that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. The statements and the words are great and the political rhetoric is great, but then we are showing the worst signals to the world because we're constantly backtracking on the at-home policies that would allow us to get there.
If you look at the current climate legislation, what we are pushing, and the Green Deal, I think there's two issues where the Parliament is trying to kind of fine-tune. There's two basic challenges. First of all, the whole cost of this transition is much more than was expected, multiplied by 2 and 3. And the second is that there was an assumption that the private sector would kick in. And there would be a flood of money and new industry, new possibilities. Now what we are facing, that is not exactly the case. So I wouldn't call it, the backtracking. I would say that, there's a fine-tuning. And of course, this is not ideological trip. It's many of these of the current discussion is because of the business and industry, and they require many rules of the implementation cannot be applied and not can be followed, and that's why we're having this discussion.
Yeah, but business and industry, that's not one group. There are many businesses across Europe that said on the due diligence, for instance, don't backtrack. On the EU anti-deforestation law, there are many businesses, including major ones, that were 10 years ago accused of deforestation, that wrote letters and letters again in statements saying, don't backtrack because we've already made the work. We've already been compliant. It has cost us a lot of money. So you say it's not ideological, but at one point, when we say we claim to listen to the concern of businesses, and then there are many businesses across Europe that are making their voices heard and are saying, don't backtrack, then I'm sorry, it's not being practical. It is being ideological.
Yeah, here I come in. Sorry. No, I will come in. So you're absolutely right. But the challenge is, for example, I come from Finland. In Finland, there is an ecosystem, there is a financing. The companies say this is very challenging, but by doing this, we are going to be in the winning side. And so for them, for example, this backtracking of the regulation, because they have made the investment, they expect certain framework, and it can be challenged. But there's a lot of segments, a lot of industry around Europe where they are not in that game. And that's, diversity in Europe is the challenge, and we need to balance it somehow. And that's what we are doing.
Two ways of looking at it there. Please let us know what you think. brusselsmylove@euronews.com is our email address. Brigitte, just the Amazon, of course, context of these negotiations. Yeah. What impact has that had? Like geographically, where you are right now having these talks?
Yeah, so we are at the end of the Amazon. It's very impressive to be, and also confrontational, because we see the deforestation around us here, literally. And Brazil has also announced that they want to have a real result on forestation. So they introduced the Tropical Forest Forever facility, where they want to make a fund that will help indigenous people also to save the forest, because they can do it at best. Because, of course, I very much support that, and we as the Parliament very much support that. Different countries of the EU, they have chipped in, but not enough yet. So I really hope that that's something that's going to happen in the coming days, that this fund is really going to be filled. Because, forestation is, of course, the most efficient way to get CO2 out of the air, and the best for our biodiversity and for the peoples that there's a lot of indigenous people here to claim their rights, and right so. And I think, if that's not an outcome of this COP, that would be a real failure. So I think, the phasing out fossil fuels is one result that we really need, the roadmap and the commitment from all the countries. And then second, deforestation, a real statement and a real filled fund.
And for more on the outcome, of course, of COP30, you can take a look at euronews.com. But I wanted to move on and speak about Shein, the Chinese fast fashion retailer that's worth about $38 billion. It's opened its first ever store in Paris. I mean, we're talking about Europe's fashion capitals. Have you ever bought anything on Shein, Tommy?
Yes, I have, for my daughter. My daughter is very angry, by the way. I mentioned this, but etc. So
because it's pretty cheap. You didn't go to the most expensive store.
With €30, you feel like
King.
a king, but of course the quality kind of varies.
The quality varies, and indeed, according to Greenpeace, their business model is based on hazardous chemicals and environmental destruction, and it's breaking, in fact, EU regulatory limits. And that's why we saw the French are furious. Let's take a listen. They've been out protesting when that shop opened. Chloe, your thoughts here on Shein opening up in Paris?
I think it's insane, like how they say that they are sure that the products that are sold are compliant, because 80% of the small parcels that arrive in Europe that come from Shein are not compliant with European regulation. So I'm really interested if they actually selected the 20 remaining percent. Shein is a massive, massive platform and a massive problem for Europe at the same time. And I don't understand how we're not yet having a conversation, and actually not even a conversation, how we're not acting to do something about Shein, whether it's actually suspending the platform, banning it. It's bad for industries. It's terrible for the environment. It's bad for consumers that are buying stuff that won't last. And we keep talking about it. The Commission is opening an investigation, never sharing their conclusion. Nothing is happening. And at the same time, there's child labor, there's environmental impact, there's actually hazardous health, also for toys for children, for instance, that are bought on Shein. It's a massive problem, not to mention the products that they found in France recently, which was a doll, horrible doll, and then also weapons. So I'm just really baffled at how we're not doing more.
This is why French politicians as well, they're in a massive row against Shein on that. Brigitte, is this something on your desk there in the European Parliament?
Well, this is not directly my topic, but I fully agree with your comments there in the studio, because this has nothing to do with the European quality market. We make all those rules to protect our consumers, to protect our environment, and this is how it goes. That is really not acceptable. So the Commission should really keep to their own rules. As simple as that.
And interesting that Günther Oettinger, does anyone remember him?
Yes, lobbyist in chief.
Former European Commissioner from Austria is actually working now for Shein. Tommy, did you know that?
No, I didn't. It's new information. I think on the Shein, I think we have a common front. It's absolutely necessary that the companies, the same rules which apply to European companies, it should be applied to those who are pushing in our markets. And I think that we need a level playing field, and we see, problem with the European retailers industry, and so we need to fix this.
And it's interesting how your daughter turned her nose up on that product, so you won't be taking her to Paris.
No to her, you know about the daughters and fathers.
Yeah, you won't be taking her to Paris anyway to that store.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, moving on, we can't really look back at this week in Brussels without mentioning this so-called digital omnibus. It was presented this Wednesday, of course. Euronews reporter Jacob Janse has been taking a look at a few acronyms that we need to know before we discuss the story. Take a listen.
Do you like acronyms? As they are free, you need to know. Are you ready? First, GDPR. That's Europe's sacred privacy shield, the toughest in the world. Second, FOMO. Fear of missing out. Because while the US and China race ahead with tech, Europe is lagging behind. And third, AI, the boom that Europe is desperate to catch. To feed that AI boom, Brussels is planning a U-turn. Leaked drafts show that EU wants to knife its own privacy rules, allowing companies to use your data for training without asking. It's a major shift from a law that only started in 2018. Critics call it death by 1,000 cuts, with privacy groups warning that your data is at risk. But the pressure is on. With 450 million Europeans currently waiting for the latest tech features, the EU fears becoming a digital museum. That's the conundrum. Europe is famous for two things: strict privacy laws and not having major big tech companies. Well, it seems Brussels has decided to fix the second problem by breaking the first. For years, we fined big tech billions for taking our data. Now, to catch up, we might just hand it to them for free.
There you go. I mean, this seems to be the story of the moment, right? I mean, this digital omnibus. Tommy, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think, saying that we are making 180-degree turns, I think I would not agree with on that.
It's too dramatic. Was Jakob too dramatic there in his report?
I think he was a bit. What we have very, number one, we made very quickly the legislation. We were legislating a reality which didn't exist. Number two, now we start to see implication, and one reason why this yesterday's packet was introduced, because there is no rules of implementation. There has not been time. And, rather label it simplification, I would call it fine-tuning. But I think the case is very clear.
Fine-tuning or tweaking. That's the word everyone in Brussels is using now.
Yes,
tweaking.
but you have, the challenge indeed, we try to push, standards and, based on certain values, but at the same time, we try to not to kill our industry and our economy, because the AI is that, the carrier of that.
But what industry? Because we don't have an AI industry at the moment in Europe. So I don't know which industry we're talking about when we say we shouldn't kill our industry in this case. And I think with this one specifically, with other deregulation omnibuses that we're seeing, I don't call them simplification, I call them deregulation. I think it's interesting to look at who's gloating, who's super happy that this is happening. It's the US, it's the Trump administration. The Trump administration has consistently asked for us to weaken a certain amount of rules, notably when it comes to our digital rights. So I think it's interesting to see many people in Europe, rejoicing of these things, pretending that it's protecting Europe's industries, when actually the only ones that are super happy about this are the Americans.
Brigitte, what is your view? Are we talking here about deregulation or simplification or tweaking? And are we just bowing to the Trump administration?
I'm getting more and more skeptical on these omnibuses, because I feel like it's taking the easy road. Sometimes we are taking away rules that we didn't even implement yet. And I think that the goal of the AI Act, we were unique in Europe. We were the first ones making good online rules on AI. And the goal to say the rights that you have offline as a European citizen, so of non-discrimination, of freedom of speech, and all those important rights that we stand for in Europe are the rights that you need online. I think that is such an important step to take as a union of values. So now coming with an omnibus, I'm going to look at it very skeptically, critically. Of course, if it can be simpler, if we can make rules easier to implement, I'm in for that. And we also, these developments in AI are going so fast, so maybe it's good to look at that, but let's not make sure that it's not a huge deregulation. And let's take the harder road and invest in our own AI, our European AI. We missed the boat when it came to internet, and let's make sure that we don't miss the boat when it comes to AI, and that we make AI that serves the public good, and that we can also be unique in that in Europe. And that asks for smart cooperation with the industry, with tech companies, and not this easy road of the omnibuses.
Chloe, when you say that the only ones who are happy with this are Americans, it's not true. You just speak with the business, with the investors, also people in this town, and they are very much, on favor this simplification, and their concerns is about to have the possibility of innovation, securing the finance, the scaling up, and all of that. So that's the issue.
Just on that very quickly, I think we can all agree that we need simplification, right? In general, not just on digital rights, but just simplification. Nobody's against it. Of course, there are too many rules. There's like legislative lasagna between national level, regional level, European level. But even von der Leyen herself said it. It is not simplification anymore. It is deregulation. So to continue to claim that it's simplification, I think it's kind of ironic, because she herself even said it. We are now deregulating, and she actually said it should also happen at the national level. So this is not simplification anymore. It is a deregulation wave to satisfy certain people, certain administrations, including the American.
Well, on that point, Chloe, we can bring the conversation to an end. Beautiful description there of the legislative lasagna. We hope
it's Belgian. We apply here in Belgium.
We hope here on Brussels, my love, we're making that legislative lasagna a little bit clearer. Chloe, thank you so much for being with us. Tommy as well. And Brigitte van den Berg, thank you so much for bringing that live analysis as well to us from Belém. Safe trip back to Brussels.
Thank you very much.
And onwards. And of course, thank you so much to you for listening, and for all those behind the scenes who got us here on air. Our sound technician, Yorgos Levidatis, our Euronews podcast producer, Alice Carnivali, and to Fatih Yatim and Juliana Mejia, our social media team. If you are not already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on euronews.com or on Euronews' YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review and spread the word about Brussels, My Love, the podcast. See you next time.